Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I'm Luke James, and I live underground by choice. 5 years since the day the stations went quiet, the world above our steel lid turned slow and mean. But down here, it settled into a routine that felt like owning a clock no one else knew how to wind. We named the place the Dugout because calling it a bunker made folks talk about the last government they remembered. And that always led to stories that pulled a person back into the wrong kind of thinking. The Dugout sits under a ridge west of Norfolk Lake, not far from the line where Baxter County turns into Ozark National Forest. We put our doorway in a limestone cut that looks like a dead end from the county road. The door is steel, plate-backed, braced with a crossbar I welded from a tow boom. It weighs more than the old farm truck I stripped to build it. I can close it one-handed with the gearbox crank. When it shuts, the air changes pitch, like closing the lid on a piano. Inside, the light warms up. You hear the water whispering under the floor. The spring was the whole reason we chose this spot. We built on stone and water and enough quiet to hear trouble before it learned our name. We run the Dugout off solar and wind, 2 tilting solar tables on the south slope, each the size of a flatbed, and a pair of used wind turbines I rescued from a maintenance yard off Highway 5 near Midway. People abandoned a lot of things in year 1. I made a habit of bringing tools home like a stray dog that kept finding bones. The batteries are banked in a climate-controlled room behind the kitchen. I got the control software from a retired electrician named Linda, who listened to shortwave and traded passwords for jars of smoked boar. The floor plan wraps around 3 compartments: bunks, galley, and systems. 2 short corridors bow off past the systems room to luxury bathrooms that make people smile when they see them for the first time, even now. I installed heated floors because morale is a fuel you can store without worrying about shelf life. We keep the freezers packed with wild boar, venison, and the surprising things you learn to grow or trade for, like butter beans or perfectly cut okra we blanch and bag on Sundays. There's an ice maker because cold before sleep stops bad dreams from sticking. We're 6 on paper, 4 in practice most days. Me, Cole Bennett, Henry Pike, and Simon Truitt, known locally as The Line because that's how we move. Years back, a rancher watched us cross a pasture in single file with night vision on, and said it looked like someone drew a ruler across the grass. The name stuck. The other 2, Eli and Rue, drift in when their trade runs take them this way. We let them bed down, shower, fix a plate, swap news, and move on. The Dugout keeps to a rule that earned us time on this earth. Fewer people, fewer mouths, fewer mistakes. We don't worry much about the infected. We run quiet 4-wheelers with sealed belts and electric conversions that Simon built out of salvage. They sip charge from our panels like kids stealing sips from a garden hose. We run PVS 14 monoculars and a thermal scope we keep in a foam cradle like it's a violin. The rifle shelf holds a Barrett 50 caliber we use for work that requires punctuation you can see, and a row of AR platforms chambered in 308 because fences are great until you need reach. For close jobs, the Benelli M4 sits above the door, oil clear as tea, stock shortened a hair to make armor and doorways less of an argument. We roll our own slugs and tailor our buckshot because one lesson from the boar fields never got old. If it needs to drop right now, make the pattern thick and the pellet count honest. The truck out in the first bay mounts a minigun that eats 7.62 by 51, like a threshing machine eats dry wheat. We have drums and drums and drums of ammunition, 55-gallon barrels full, sealed against the damp and labeled with a neatness that would make a grocery manager proud. That last part is important. People think survival is steel and noise. It is, but it is also handwriting you can read 6 months later. My full name is Lucas Jameson, but my friends called me Luke James when I was a child, and over the years that name stuck. Before all this, I was a county inspector who spent more days than I liked looking at drainage failures and telling contractors to redo work they thought no one would check. I learned early that gravity and water win arguments if you let them. It's strange how that job prepared me for a world where every mistake becomes a flood. I brought that habit here. Nothing gets installed without a sacrificial part. Nothing gets built without a drain. Or we patrol every other dusk unless the wind is carrying sound the wrong way. Cole runs point because he was born with a map in his head. Henry watches our sky. Birds tell him things. Simon handles the quiet machines. I keep the log, the schedule, the radios, and the list. In 5 years, we learned the dead have habits. They like sun-warmed surfaces at noon and culverts at midnight. They drift along fence lines and gather at old habit structures like gas pumps and doorways, even when the glass is long gone. You build a grid. The grid becomes a language, and that language lets you move without accidents. The night everything changed. The air felt thick with cedar sap, and the crickets cut out in a way that made Cole lift his hand without looking back. We were in a draw east of our ridge, down near a dry stream bed, where we set out salt blocks for hogs. The plan was simple. Pull the cards from 2 cameras, check the mineral site for tracks, loop back by the old mail road, and be home in time to baste the boar shoulder Henry had seared that morning. Then the radio cracked with a voice that sounded like a scrape of tin and grief. "Please," a woman said on 2 meter, voice small, as if she feared her own words would break something. "Please, if anyone hears this, I'm at the FEMA site off Highway 14, the south access. The gate is stuck. They left me in the lower level. I'm alone." We froze, not because of fear, because surprise makes trained men do math before they breathe again. That site had been silent since year 2. It sat 10 miles from our northern fence. Behind a curve of road the trees took back. We had been near it, watched it with glass. It never answered. Cole clicked his mic once, then again. I shook my head even though he couldn't see it. On the 3rd click I held my transmit down and spoke clear. "Identify yourself." The voice came back a little steadier. "Maya Jennings, logistics. They evacuated, and they forgot me." Henry's hand hovered over the minuscule volume knob on his headset. Simon looked through me like he was checking the calendar floating over my shoulder. I carried the rulebook in my mouth, and the rulebook said ignore everything that arrives with perfect timing. But I also carried the habit from another life where people called for help, and someone went. That habit is why we built the dugout instead of a hole to die in. "We don't have to do this tonight," Cole said later at the door, when gear lay on the bench in neat lines and the Benelli M4 waited like a well-trained dog. Trap or not, the site is still the site in the morning. "If it's real," I said, "morning could be coffin quiet in there." Henry tied his boots slow, then checked each lace knot like he was reading code. "My vote is go," he said, "but with rules. We keep the trip tight. We don't take the truck. We take the quads. Low profile. We go in by the spur path through the power line cut. If anything shines wrong, we turn around as if the house is on fire." Simon tapped the battery status on a tablet. "We can make it and back with 3 bars to spare," he said, "but I'm adding a spare pack to each rack. I want redundancy even on redundancy." We left at the blue edge of dark, when the sky over the lake looks like steel wool catching light. The quads drifted over the rutted road without a cough of noise. We cut west on a cattle path Henry knew from poaching days his father never fully forgave him for, crawled under a tangle of downed fence, and climbed into the power line right-of-way where grass came up to the footrests and seed heads brushed our knees. The towers along that corridor stood like old goalposts leaning into a game no one wanted to play anymore. The FEMA site lay in a low bowl, berms piled up like frozen waves. The south access had a steel gate and a roofed guardhouse with windows punched out long ago. Whoever had manned it left in a hurry or under orders. I used the thermal and scanned the berm crests. Nothing bright, nothing hotter than the land. A few white smears moved slow along the fence like loss wearing a coat. "Maya," I said into the mic low, "if you can hear me, click once." One click came back, small as fingernail to metal. She told us the lower level door opened from the inside with a manual lever and a man with a wrench. She said the outer gate needed power we didn't have. Cole found the gate's chain and used a bolt cutter with jaws like jaws. The chain parted like it had been waiting to fail for 2 winters. We rolled through along the fence line, lights dark, watching for arcs of movement that didn't belong to wind. The lower-level door sat in a concrete recess, paint still fresh under the dust like a lie that hadn't learned it was one yet. I ran my hand along the seam and found no telltale lips of welded sabotage. The manual lever stood straight out. A laminated instruction sheet hung on a chain in case a new hire lost his nerve. I breathed, counted backwards out of habit, and took the lever. Steel reluctantly met steel. Then something gave, and the door budged with a growl. Cold air kissed my face like an open freezer lost on a hot day. "Maya, are you close?" Silence thick as wet wool, then a voice that did not sound like hers. One word, like someone testing the weight of it. "Closer." The light hit us then, not from the doorway but from above. A clean white lens flare that painted the dust in lines. Our units blinked. The night vision turned itself thin. Simon's quad status screen went grey. Henry hissed, not fear, just warning. The radio emitted the slow, careful tone of a transmitter stepping aside for something stronger. "Jammer," Simon said, voice so flat it felt like a measurement. "Somebody's pinching the band." I pulled back from the door lever and set the Benelli M4 against my shoulder. I kept my eyes away from the light's exact center. When you live as long as we have, you start cataloging what you've trained for and what you haven't. Jamming was in the book. We had plans for that. What I didn't like was the timing. We made our move and someone else made theirs, like they were using our schedule. "Luke," Cole said quietly, "batteries." I looked at the quads. Their small tail lamps had the faintest halo they always get when powered but idling. One by one, as if in a lazy row, those halos dimmed and went out. The quads didn't groan. They didn't blink. They simply quit like soldiers told to stand down. We train for walking home. We train for losing gear. The world really is nothing more than a series of excuses to turn around. We shouldn't have felt what we felt then. The sense of stepping towards something that didn't want to be solved, but did want to close behind us. Yet Cole looked at me, and I looked at him, and neither of us said go back. Sometimes duty wears the same jacket as vanity, and you don't see the difference until you catch your reflection in a wrong window. We slid into the lower level like three men visiting a burial vault they paid for in advance. The air had that kept smell old libraries have. A strip of emergency luminescence led down the hall like a breadcrumb trail no one wanted to follow. We moved as the line, Benelli to the front, 308 at the hip, Cole watching behind us with a pistol he could choose a freckle with. On the third door a small light blinked like an animal's eye. A speaker crackled. "I'm in here," the voice said. It wasn't the bright whisper we heard on the road. It was a copy of a copy. "Please open." I reached out but didn't touch the latch. "What's the name of the operations chief you worked under?" I asked. "Chief Daniels," the voice said, relieving, polite. Cole answered before he knew he was answering. Too generic. I stepped to the side and used the lamp from my belt to look along the floor seam. It was clean. So clean. No dust at the jam. No bug carcasses in the corners. That's when I understood. This wasn't a tomb. It was a showroom. "Back out," I said. "Now." We pivoted, and the corridor lights did something corridors shouldn't do. They brightened a little as if to show us our mistake all the way to the exit. A figure stood in the doorway to the right, grey clothing, face in shadow, hands empty. It didn't move for us. It moved to block the hall, and stayed. I brought the Benelli up and spoke plain. "Move." It took a step forward like a person at a checkout deciding which line might be faster. Then another. The skin tone was wrong. The neck had the lazy lean of a rope with memory. Infected. But it was not alone. Two more came behind it. Then a third whose clothes showed fresh tears. They didn't rush. They fanned like cattle herded by a pair of patient dogs. We cut left through a storage bay because the corridor had started thinking for us. The bay held pallets stacked high, shrink-wrapped, labels from federal supply depots. The smell of new plastic lived in there. We pushed through and out the far door into a stairwell that would take us up and out across the berm. A chain lay coiled at the bottom like metal snakes sleeping. Henry took the stair 3 at a time, without looking like he was in a hurry. Cole moved backward, firearm steady, tracing arcs in the space between us and their hands. At the top of the stairs, the exit lever refused to move. It had been welded softly from the other side. Not a whole seam, just a series of light kisses to keep the throw from throwing. I put the Benelli butt to the weld and popped it like dental work. We poured out under the sky, into air that tasted of cedar again. The light was gone. The jammer still held. Our quads waited nearby like furniture no one had permission to touch. We ran 50 yards along the fence line and slid under at a gap Henry had used a dozen times for deer. When we stood, a slow chorus rose behind us and gathered itself into a mass of bodies moving one way because something else wanted them to. I looked back at the access road. A truck sat up on the berm that hadn't been there before. You can tell a military mount by the carriage. You know a minigun when you see one. This one wasn't ours. It started slow, deliberate, like someone didn't want to scare us with how fast it could spin. It walked rounds into the fence posts where we had been, and then wrote a long line across a stand of brush to our left. Not at us. Near us. A shepherd, not a butcher. On the truck bed, 2 men moved like dock workers. Efficient. Their faces had the carelessness of people who already decided how this scene ends. We cut into the trees. Using the dips in ground we know the way a carpenter knows which boards creak. Shots came now. Sharp. Measured. From a distance. Someone had our sightlines printed. A whisper of a drone passed somewhere above the timber, like a night bird pretending to be rain. We made the power line cut on foot. My left thigh started to give me notes I didn't want to read, but I kept the pace because stopping is a question predators know how to answer. At the far edge of the right-of-way, something heavy met my leg low. The world spun simple and then set itself back down. I looked down and saw glass teeth biting up from a buried board. Whoever set it knew we would step right there. The board had a green stripe of old paint and a habit of sitting half buried by mud. My pants showed a tear that didn't comprehend anything yet. "Snare board," Simon said, kneeling, voice soft. "We can cut the strip without tearing the fabric. You'll walk." I stood because that's what was left to do. We moved to the quads like men who had left tools on a job site and had to go back for them. At the machines, Simon popped the cases. Every pack switch sat in the on position. Meter reads were perfect. He grabbed a spare battery from his pack, plugged it, and the dash came alive. He unplugged it, plugged mine, and mine lit. Our built-ins stayed dead. Someone had signaled them to sleep. Someone had the code. We took the spare packs and strapped them down like first aid. The quads woke with their soft hum. We put heads down and cut south and west using creek bottoms, logging spurs, and a cattle gate we paid the owner for with bricks of lard her husband still talks about like he won a contest. No pursuit came loud. That bothered me more than if it had. Our maps say time is a door. Those men up on the berm had no need to run. They knew where we lived. The dugout door met us with that piano hush. Inside, Simon went to systems. Cole went to the gun shelf and laid the Benelli M4 on its cloth like it was going to sleep. I sat on the bench and let Henry cut the pant leg carefully. He dabbed, checked, and told me what I wanted to hear, and also what I didn't. "Deep," he said. "Clean cut, but deep. It will want days. You get one." We didn't argue. We moved like men who had rehearsed this play. Cole took the first watch. Simon started a sweep on the cameras. Henry stood at the kitchen sink with the spring water running and scrubbed his hands like a man about to do delicate work. He always does that even when the job is fueling the generator. Clean is not about germs out here. Clean is about declaring what kind of house you keep. The outer cameras showed 2 ferals drifting past the mailbox we put up as a joke year 2. They had the slow shuffle of things between plans. At midnight, a flash strobed up on the ridge where the power line cuts the sky. It was distant, improvised, not quite a signal, not quite a flare. Simon leaned close as if the pixels might confide something. "Had to be the minigun crew," he said. "They're not worried about us coming to them. They want us worried about who comes here." I lay on my bunk and stared at the ceiling while the little fan above me shook dust into patterns. I didn't think about the leg. I thought about the voice that said closer in a tone that sounded like someone tasting the word. I thought about the welds on the stair lever and the showroom clean floor seam. Someone had studied us. Someone had made a list as tidy as mine. At dawn, we ran the perimeter with the truck for the first time in months. The minigun mount tracked smooth under my hand. The belt fed like a zipper. We didn't fire. We let the truck be seen where it needed to be seen, then tucked it back behind the berm where the grass hides the tires. We strung a length of fishing line with beer tabs along the southern ravine so the wind could talk to us if someone walked there. We added a pair of clay jars full of ball bearings to the downhill approach, the kind of old-world solutions that do not require firmware updates. By noon, Eli rolled in from the west on a motorcycle that smelled like old gas and luck. He had a smile that made bad news sound like a story worth telling. He took one look at my leg and let the smile flatten. "You want gossip or a bandage first?" "Gossip is the bandage," I said. He set his helmet down and leaned his elbows on the table like kitchens still meant coffee and not maps. "There's a crew working the old regional command post at Mountain Home Airfield," he said. "Not a uniform among them. They trade fuel for information and leave shells behind that say, 'Government stock once upon a time.' Folks down by Tracy Ferry say a lifted truck with a spool gun on the bed runs the river road at night like it's a parade. Someone told me they've been scanning shortwave for voices that say things like please and help and left behind. They don't rush in, they circle. Then later the place gets flatter. Not burned, flattened, like someone harvested." Cole looked at me without moving his head. "We just shook their hand," he said. "Felt like it," I said. "They jammed our comms, slept our packs, knew our road. We walked into a staged scene. It was clean, Eli. Cleaner than Federal ever kept it when paperwork had a budget." Eli traced a finger along a crack in the table like it was a river that might lead somewhere. "You built this place to be a door that opens only when you want it," he said. "Might be time to make it a maze too." We did. All afternoon we worked on the inside paths the way hunters manipulate wind. We set one corridor to close from either side if a hidden catch wasn't pressed. We stacked the false freezer with bags of ice that hid a steel wall. We wired the west vent to blow a charge if someone pulled the grate without hitting a deadman switch behind the second shelf in the pantry. Henry labeled every can in the pantry in his neat hand, the same neat hand he used to write the names of the men we lost in year 1 on the back of the battery room door. Ritual makes a place visible to the living, and it makes it stubborn to the dead. Night came with a north wind that pushed the cedar smell into a corner and gave us the clean stone scent that means sound will travel far. We liked that. We set the radios to low, checked the seal on the door, and took turns pretending to sleep. Near 2 in the morning, the beer tabs on the fishing line tapped a rhythm that wasn't wind. I saw Cole sit up without using his hands, like a man remembering something important. The monitor on camera 4 showed the ravine, empty, then not. 2 figures in dark clothing, careful feet, hands low like they didn't want to silhouette. They didn't look feral. They didn't look amateur. They reached the place where the gravel changes color because that's where the runoff always leaves a lighter wash. The first stepped over it like he knew water told stories. The second followed without looking, because trust is also a danger. They went down the slope and out of frame, but the beer tabs kept time again in a new pattern. On camera 6, 2 more showed near the false rock we installed year 3 to cover the pipe that carries grey water away. They crouched. One took out a small device that looked like a phone with more intention. He aimed it at the rock. He aimed it along the seam where the rock meets ground. "Infrared leak test," Simon whispered. Respect threaded into it, looking for warmth where a seal should be cold. "They're good." We let them be good. We let them pass 2 tests by inches. We watched because this was the most valuable moment. The one where you let a thief step just inside the threshold so he shows you his plan. The first pair moved to the door recess. One took a mirror on a rod and angled it into the hinge pocket. He looked. He nodded. He placed something that looked like a stick of gum where the hinge pin lives. They didn't try the lever. They didn't even touch the surface. They were working a playbook that belonged to people whose days used to begin with a briefing. "Clay jars," I said to Henry. He rose like a man going to turn off a forgotten burner. He slipped into the short passage and opened the little port we built waist-high for air exchange. He slid his hand through and set one jar on the outside ledge where it looks like a vent cap. He set the second on the other side. He pulled the cord we threaded through to a toggle under the pantry shelf. He returned, then picked up the old phone we use as a timer when we want a potato to bake, and we also want to watch a clock do what clocks do. He set it for 10 seconds and put the screen where we could see it. When the 0 came, he flipped the toggle. The air outside coughed. The jars didn't detonate like in movies. They spit. Gravel and steel and ancient marbles hustled out in a tight fan that made the first man fall and the second flatten against the door. The device on the hinge skittered like a beetle. Cole already had the Benelli M4 up in the firing slit. He sent a pair of loads that we pack heavy in the mouth of the recess. It turned into a place people don't want to be. The pair moved because men do even when they plan. They dragged the fallen one with the kind of grasp that says, "Practice." They disappeared into the angle where camera 4 cannot see because I chose not to cut that oak down. I have thought about that oak many nights since. I left it on purpose years ago. Some things you keep because you might need a blind. Minutes passed, measured by the tabs on the line, and the spider that lives in camera 6's housing crawling along the edge of the frame. We waited. The wind waited with us. Then the drone sound again, a higher pitch this time, like someone got lazy about altitude. It floated low across the lid and tried to peer in the kitchen skylight where the steel thickens. It pivoted. It blinked a red diode that betrayed it. The minigun does not require much coaxing to express an opinion. I held it coaxed. I let the drone live and drift away because bullets draw maps. Morning found shoe prints near the second berm, a small patch of blood that looked more brown than red to me, and the mark of a heavy thing dragged by a strap. We tracked those signs to the power line cut and then lost them because the crew knew what they were about. Back at the table, Eli poured coffee and made a face that said he missed sugar when sugar had a price you could argue with. "They're not done," he said. "Not after last night. Not after you picked up the phone and said hello to their little fishing lure. Folks like that don't forgive curiosity. They harvest it." "Then we give them a crop that spoils," I said. The plan we chose that afternoon came from a year one mistake. Back then, we stored ammunition in the easiest room to defend. That meant it became a room we overvalued. That meant it became a place we would die to keep. I moved our ammunition to 3 locations after that. 1 visible, 2 not. We keep 55-gallon drums lined up where anyone can see them and assume that's the bank. The other drums live where only a fool would put them, under a slab that appears to be the dog wash, and up in the false ceiling of the systems hall where no one would want the weight. The visible drums are not empty. They are, however, the wrong recipe. We built them to lag and choke and foul after a few mags. We set the visible drums near the door. We left the lid slightly askew on one. We stacked a few ammo cans next to them with foam cutouts that said we meant to restock and got distracted. We staged a false argument at the bench, 2 cups still wet, a map pin in a road we did not plan to use. Henry actually raised his voice. Cole actually rolled his eyes. Real is easy when you have a past with someone. We also opened the little vent port, just enough to let the smell of oil out into the doorway. The second night they came ghost quiet, and they came more than 4. Our cameras counted 8 shapes and then lost count because some men leave gaps on purpose. The first team went to the door with the hinge device again, but they didn't place it. They let the first failure be a note in a ledger. The second team drifted along the wall toward the vent. A third pair circled to the backside, where the kitchen skylight nestles under a sod cover. Whoever was on their radio had an easy way of speaking that made you forget the words were orders. I waited until the minute the vent team leaned close enough to fog the little stainless cap. Then I spoke on the 2-meter, clear and normal, like a dispatcher at a small-town firehouse. "Maya, we're at the site," I said. "Hold tight. We've got you." The men at our door stilled. The ones at the vent tilted their heads. I could feel the curiosity slip its leash. Cole touched my shoulder just once, a reminder not to enjoy the moment too much. I do not know why I smiled. Maybe because the voice in the hall down at the FEMA site said closer, with a hunger for something beyond food. And these men held the same hunger, but thought it had a different name. The hinge device went on clean. I let it. The door kicked outward a fraction as the pin surrendered, and the first team slipped in low under the threshold with muzzles down. If there is one thing I knew we could beat them at, it was moving inside our own home. The corridor they entered did not lead to the ammo room it appeared to. It led to a short dogleg with an inset steel wall disguised by shelves of canned peaches and the homely boredom of stored food. When the first man reached for a can to test the depth, the shelf swung lightly. He blinked, I think. I pulled a chain, the dogleg door dropped, and the corridor became a pocket with nothing to recommend it. The vent team popped the grate and met the dead man's switch. The charge was small, more noise than harm, but it filled the work with grit and smell and made their hands clumsy for the amount of time we needed. The skylight team lifted the sod cover and found the steel that lives under it like a secret spine. Someone up top said 2 words without urgency. Then the drone came again. Low, too low. I didn't shoot it. I used the minigun to cut a line in the gravel 10 feet in front of our door, a signature that says we can write our names in stone if pushed. I wanted the men outside to hear the tone of that tool and recognize it as a cousin to their own. It worked. Half of them backed to the berm line, weapons up, eyes on angles. The other half communicated with little hand signs that meant someone actually trained them once upon a time. They didn't bolt, and they didn't flood. The pocket we made in the dogleg did its slow work. Not bruising, but stealing time. The way a bad cross street steals time from a hurried driver. That was all we needed to move. Cole and I slid into the west corridor that parallels the pantry. Henry stayed on cameras. Simon, bless him, went to systems and put the battery banks into a mode I call night snow, a soft power drift that flattens the draw signatures in our wiring until we look like we are sleeping at noon. The men inside the pocket heard the minigun spit and leaned toward the sound like people do when a loud noise offers them direction. Cole put a pair of quiet 308 shots into the floor at their feet through the firing slit. Concrete chips do their own kind of arguing. The men went to ground, surprised that ground can rise up. Take the gifts they give you, my father used to say when he taught me to read blueprints and see where water would go. The men gave us the gift of caution. They gave us the gift of training that can be predicted. I keyed the external speaker and spoke in a voice that tried to remember what those briefings used to sound like when I'd stand in a county garage and tell 3 crews that the culvert had failed because someone decided to save money on fill. Pull back, I said, calm as gravel. You're wasting good men for a pantry that holds sugar and regret. Silence bloomed and held. When the unknown voice answered, it had that friendly cut to it I recognized from salesmen and soft threats. Mr. James, it said, as if we were at a hometown barbecue, you have a lovely front room. We would like to see the rest. You and your boys spend a lot of time clearing our part of the woods of the dead. That's kindness. We'd like to be neighbors in a way that benefits both households. Neighbors cut their own firewood, I said. They don't send drones to count it. He chuckled, small, genuine. You cleared the herd that used to sleep along the river road by Tracy Ferry, he said. You cleaned out the school buses on 201. You put down the group that tried to set up a market at the boat ramp, and you took the last of their diesel. We watched you because we like to learn from professionals. We are not angry. We are impressed. It is a strange feeling to be complimented by a man who wants your home. I let the feeling pass like heat lightning, interesting but not useful. If you're impressed, you know the math, I said. Every second you stay here is a second the sound of your voice travels. The dead will come. You know what that looks like on a thermal. You know the way it piles, the way it pushes. You brought 8, maybe 10. We can guess where the rest sit. The difference is, we have water under our floor, and air we can lock. You have a view. He didn't speak for a moment. When he did, his tone had adapted to a new page in his book. We do not want to spend men, he said. We prefer trades. Here is ours. You are bleeding. Your left thigh. We have a medic who can do a clean field repair better than your friend will do by lamplight. We have antibiotics we know you cannot make. In return, you open the door, permit a walkthrough, then join us on a short drive to the airfield to assess opportunities. You will like what you see. There is a place for men like you in what comes next. The boys turned their faces to me in that way teams do when a call needs making. You can feel fate opening its case and laying out instruments. I thought about the clean seam on the FEMA door and the gravel that knew where my boot would land. I thought about my sons when they were small, how they would run ahead and hide behind trees and then wait too long for me to find them. As if the point was not the game, but the waiting. I keyed the speaker. "You already walked through," I said. "You already had your drive. The answer is no." The man exhaled through his nose, the sound of a foreman forgiving a crew for not understanding the schedule. "Then we will change the offer," he said. "We will take your generosity in a form easier to carry. We will take your ammunition. You will keep your nice bathrooms and your freezer food. You will keep your cameras. You will keep your dignity. We will go, and we will not come back unless your radio lights up the way it did yesterday, which would make us neighbors of a different sort." Cole smiled without humor. He liked when people named their wants. It made him feel the ground again. I flipped the switch that opened the inner view from the ammo room to the door alcove. The men saw what we wanted them to see. Drums labeled neat as a grocer's dream, a few cans half cracked, foam inserts honest as church. The hinge device man gestured. Two stepped forward with carts they assembled on the spot. They moved with a kind of reverence that might have been love in another life. We let them take the wrong drums. We let them stack the wrong cans. We watched them belly laugh without sound when they discovered a crate of old tracer belts sitting abandoned under a tarp. We made a point of hovering the camera on that tarp long enough to feel like an oversight. They bit. The men at the vent pulled the last of the false lids off the wrong stock and stacked them with pride. When they left, they did it like men moving furniture from a house a relative said they could have because he was downsizing. They did not rush. They did not crow. They worked. Then they went. When their truck engines were gone and the drone finally chose a horizon, Henry walked up the line of jars on the pantry shelf like a priest moving along pews. He blew out the little candle he keeps behind the flour because he says open flame is a good way to count a day. We cleaned up the corridor pocket, reset the dogleg, replaced the vent grate, and took down the beer tab line because it had done its duty. Then we waited. The first sound of their failure drifted up from the west a little after dawn. It was quiet as a gasp, and it carried the smaller sounds you only hear when machines forget their manners. Actions that don't complete, clicks that shouldn't be there, the grind of a feed tray that can't believe what it is being fed. Our recipe is simple. A dust of graphite where oil should be thick, a handful of rounds with primers seated just proud enough to make a firing pin talk back, a ratio that fouls a chamber like a bargain meal fouls a stomach. The second sound was human, not words. The way groups become 100 different plans at once when a machine that used to be certain suddenly isn't. The third sound made me place my hand on the minigun mount not to fire but to feel the possibility of firing like a talisman. It was the slow roll of the dead deciding a new path had opened. The airfield sits near open ground that looks like freedom until you realize it is a bowl with flat sides. Noise sits down there. Noise sticks. Noise calls. "We could go finish it," Cole said, not hungry, just practical. "We could," I said, "or we could watch a lesson teach itself." We climbed to the observation blind we cut into the ridge above the old mail road. The airfield lay 2 miles as the crow flies, just enough to make details a guess. Through the glass, we saw trucks pinned at the taxiway, men moving in the cautious chaos of distrust, each to machine, each to the ground beneath them. At the edges of that picture, movement gained mass like wind piling leaves. The dead don't sprint. They don't plan. They do accumulate. Anyone with thermal knows that slope. An hour later, the trucks left the runway and tried the grass. That told me things I didn't want to know about their patience, and also things that eased something I didn't know I had been carrying. People who lean too hard on systems get surprised when grass refuses to be a road. A line of figures broke from the assembled men and moved in an arc that said a group had decided on one plan, and that plan had a poster boy. The arc ran toward the line of trees that hides the old fire break. The fire break, I knew, would pull them like a drain. At the end of that break is a culvert the highway department set the summer before the world slid sideways. The culvert is slightly undersized for the attention it gets in heavy rain. Water collects there, so do other rivers. We did not cheer. We do not do that. We watched a neighbor problem solve in a way that told us both what they were and what we would need to be if they came again. The infected moved slower than the story some people tell about them, but they have endurance. By midday, stubbornness beat clever. The trucks forced a hole and slipped out along the county road in a drawn-out S that told me one of them had a steering issue. The drones didn't come our way. The voices stayed off our radio. The day became a lesson we could file. Before sunset, I put on a clean shirt that made me think of a Sunday somebody's grandmother would appreciate, and I went to the bench. I wrote down what we saw. I recorded the time the drone came and when it chose to leave. I noted that the men carried cutters and mirrors and hinge tools, that they favored silence and didn't kick doors. I wrote the words closer on a line by itself. Then, I locked the notebook in the drawer where I keep letters from my boys written before the mail ran out of diesel and stopped. Henry brought me a plate with cold boar and a smear of blackberry jam that turned the meat bright in one corner. He sat across and didn't speak until I finished. "You didn't go to the field because you wanted them to go back to whoever did the books," he said. "Right," I said. "We didn't take their engine. We took their trust. That kind of loss puts cracks in a crew. Cracks do more for us than bodies do." He nodded and looked at the door like men look at the ocean after a storm. "That voice," he said quietly, "the one at the FEMA site, the word it used." We cleaned our plates. We checked the door. We took turns on the wall. 3 nights passed and no one came up the road or through the ravine. The drone's red diode did not blink in our sky. Eli left with bandages and antibiotics he did not have to trade for, because our spring does more work than money ever did. Simon tweaked the battery banks and made the night snow mode something the software would pretend it invented. Cole walked the cedar line and reset the beer tab string, not because we needed it, but because a string that taps in the dark gives a man a way to hear before he decides. On the 4th day, a radio we keep on a shelf for nostalgia's sake cracked like someone stepped on a bottle in a quiet room. The voice that came was male and tired. He didn't say please. He said a place and a road and a gate that worked once upon a time. I turned it off. I put my hand on the radio for a count of 10. Then I put a piece of tape over the dial and wrote, "Do not," in small letters. Even I would respect on a night when I might not. That evening we sat at the table and I opened the little steel box where we keep what passes for faith here. Inside is a list of names of folks we have helped and folks we have not, and the reasons for both. Inside are 2 bullets engraved with initials from a day we needed to remember, not just the ones we lost, but who they were when we met them. Inside is a plastic sheriff's badge my younger boy won at a county fair a lifetime ago. I set the box on the table and took out the list. I added a line, "Airfield crew, neighbors we must not forget." I added a second line, "FEMA site, showrooms belong to salesmen." Cole said, "You think they'll come back?" "Not for a while," I said. "Pride needs time to find a new story." Henry tilted his head the way he does when the nighthawks over the lake change direction. "And when they do," he said, "they won't bring tricks. They will bring numbers." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe they will bring a flag and a man with a smile who thinks smiles oil gears." Simon stood and stretched his back like a carpenter at the end of a day. "If they come with numbers," he said, "we have a truck that writes long sentences. If they come with a smile, we have coffee and a crossbar." We laughed, not loud, just enough to prove we could. The light over the table threw our shadows onto the far wall where the battery room door carries the names. I read them as if they were road signs on a dark highway. Some belonged to men we buried. Some belonged to people we turned away and then could not find again. I let my eyes settle on the neat labels of the wrong drums by the door and thought about all the evenings in the last 5 years when I believed the dead were the only problem worth solving. The dead teach quick. The living assign homework, set deadlines, and grade on curves you never agreed to. Later, under the little fan that stirs dust into faint weather, I listened to the spring move beneath the floor and let that water cover the chores inside my head one by one. Water keeps going even when men change plans. Gravity shows up on time. Steel behaves if you forgive it twice a year and rub it with oil the color of tea. That is the book I trust. We built a place that holds. We keep lists the way other folks keep photographs. We move like a line. We accept the gifts our neighbors bring, even when those gifts arrive inside trouble. The morning carried chores no one could avoid. Henry checked the traps on the second ravine and found only raccoon prints nosing around the clay fragments. Simon sat with the battery banks and rewrote his little script so night snow mode would look like a lullaby to any cheap meter. Cole walked the cedar line alone and came back with a pocket of brass that wasn't ours, the kind that rolls under a truck seat and waits for a new story. I set 2 new cameras with overlapping fields on the power line cut and hung a single strand of bright flagging where a person in a hurry might mistake it for a surveyor's mark. Sometimes the best defense is to give people a decoy path they can't resist. By late afternoon, a soft rain found the ridge. We opened the vent caps so the kitchen would smell like wet stone instead of gun oil. We ate meat cold and onions fried until they melted into the bread. Dinner was quiet in the way crews get quiet when every person is counting the same set of doors. After the plates were done, I took the notebook from the steel drawer and wrote the day as it was, not as it felt. I recorded the hinge device, the mirror on the rod, the jammer tone, the drone with the red diode, the men who moved like they once attended briefings that served good coffee. I wrote a note underlined twice. Never let the first clean room flatter you into thinking the whole building is honest. Eli stayed the night. The rain knocked its steady rhythm on the sod over the skylight. He slept in the bunk near the pantry and woke early, moving the way travelers do when they try to leave without waking a house. Before he saddled up, he handed me a small plastic tag he said he found on the edge of the mail road where trucks had turned. It was the kind worn on a lanyard to open doors. The name strip was scraped blank, but the back carried a barcode and a number. I put it in the drawer with the letters from my boys and told myself that one day, when the world has time for errands, I will take that tag to an office that used to exist and ask it questions. 3 days passed without drones or visitors. We used that time the way a craftsman uses the last hour of good light. We poured a narrow footing along the inside of the door recess and set a steel lip that would catch a pry bar and turn it into a lesson. We built a fake utility box against the wall outside, wired to trip a camera and a chalk bomb if opened. We taught ourselves a new set of hand signs that meant the same thing as words we had gotten lazy with, because anyone who studies lip movements on silent cameras shouldn't get to own our meaning. On the 4th day, I took Cole to the FEMA site at dawn. We went by the spur below the old rock quarry, then hiked the last half mile without the quads. The bowl was empty the way churches look on weekdays. The lower door sat open 6 inches, as if someone wanted airflow to erase yesterday. Inside, the floors were swept. Not spotless, but tended. In a side hall we found a speaker tucked behind a false vent plate. It ran off a small battery pack. When I tapped the case, a female voice, bright and strained, said the name we heard before and repeated the plea. It was a recording on loop. Cole watched my face, waiting for the feeling to pass. He doesn't say I told you. He lets me draw my own map to the same town. We took the device, then found 3 more in different rooms, each aimed down a hallway like lures on a trot line. In the storage bay we found shoe scuffs. Not fresh, but not old. We left our own prints in the same places, out of order, then pressed our heels to make new directions for anyone reading the floor with care. On the way out, we lifted the manual lever and wedged the door with a steel block we painted the color of dust. A week later, we heard talk of the airfield men in the only way talk moves now, which is 1 person at a time. A trapper named Lavon parked his flat-bottom boat near our fence and asked if we wanted to trade for trotline hooks. He said 2 trucks had rolled through the county line at night and 1 broke down by the Big Pecan. Men argued in voices that didn't match the hour. He heard the word scrub repeated like a broom on concrete. He heard someone say the word audit and someone else say the word purge in a way that meant paperwork without paper. None of it was about us by name. All of it was about us by weight. We did not relax. We did not turn inward. We did the opposite. We made our presence visible in the places where showing yourself does more than hiding. We checked on the widow's place at the bottom of the ridge and cleared the fence line where vines had started to pull the posts. We stacked extra wood at the church that doesn't hold services anymore but still hosts hot coffee on the first Sunday when folks remember what year it is. We left 2 pails of canned okra at the little free pantry that a family keeps alive in honor of a grandfather who loved to fish. We told no one we left them. People can count without help. On a cool morning in October, a flag we had not seen in years appeared on the power line cut. Not the old one. A white square with a green stripe and a saw blade stenciled in the center. Under it stood 3 men without rifles shouldered. One carried a clipboard. It was the kind of display a crew puts on when they want to suggest a council meeting without chairs. I watched from the blind and let them sweat in the shade line, where the sun inches along and makes time feel heavy. After a while, I walked out with Cole 10 paces behind me and a radio in my pocket that was not turned on. The clipboard man introduced himself with a first name that could have been true or borrowed. He spoke about restoring routes, about keeping the valley open for trade, about setting a signal schedule so people could sleep knowing someone else was awake. He did not mention the hinge device, the drone, or the drums. He asked for a modest share of ammunition in exchange for a sticker to place on our road gate that would mean safe passage from those who answer to the saw blade. I told him we tax ourselves already. We pay in fence posts repaired, in ditches cleared, in gravel moved from the wrong place to the right. I told him we do not pay twice for the same road. He smiled in a way meant to sand the edge off the moment and said perhaps we could contribute service instead. Perhaps we could help with patrols, given our reputation for moving quiet. Cole adjusted his hat and looked at nothing in particular. The man eventually folded his flag and left on foot. No one raised a voice. Sometimes not giving an argument any oxygen is the best fire break you can build. That winter ran long and dry. The dead thinned along the fence lines as forage got scarce and Cole took the spring from their gate. We used the months to pull copper from an abandoned lodge farther up the ridge and to replace the wiring in the kitchen with conduit that would make any inspector nod. I know because I used to be one. We built a second door inside the first, not as thick but set at an angle so any straight shot would meet steel twice. We moved 1 bathroom deeper into the rock and turned its old footprint into a decon room that smelled like bleach and patience. In late March, the airfield men tried again, this time with charm. A woman with a good voice rode in the bed of a truck and sang a tune that used to play at county fairs while kids lined up for lemonade. She set her words to fresh promises about shared weather reports and a pool of fuel stored in a place where thieves could be publicly shamed. She did not sing about who kept the keys. We listened from the blind. Henry said the melody felt like it wanted to sit in your head and rent a room. We let the song pass over us and go somewhere else. 2 months after that, a fire tore along the river road after a lightning strike found a pile of brush someone had stacked against an old shed out of habit. The wind shoved the flame at the angle that makes people run the wrong way. We went anyway. We kept our distance from the worst of it and did the simple work, dragging wet canvas across a line, pulling 2 calves out of a barbed knot, moving a propane tank with a hand truck before it decided the conversation was over. At dusk, I saw 3 of the airfield men at the far end of the smoke doing the same math. No one waved. It was enough to watch each other put water where water belongs. We did not see them again that summer. Sometimes absence is strategy. Sometimes it is the sound of a plan being edited by the world. Rumor put their numbers smaller and their voices sharper. A trader said the saw blade flag came down and a new mark went up that looked like a bridge. Another said the bridge broke after rain. News walks with limps in times like these. We measure by what shows up on the camera and what does not. In the years that followed, the dugout changed because we asked it to. We added a second wind turbine rebuilt from 2 bent towers I found half buried behind a warehouse in Mountain Home. Simon tuned the inverters until our lights forgave cloudy stretches without a complaint. We trained a pair of dogs to know the difference between deer that wander and boots that hesitate. The dogs sleep by the door on cold nights and sprawl in the cool hall by the battery room on hot afternoons. Cole mapped trails to the south that let us cross 3 creeks without wetting a boot, then passed those routes to 2 farm families in exchange for seed and a promise to ring a bell if traffic ever stacks up on the county road in ways it should not. Henry started a habit of reading to whoever would listen on Sundays after the tools were hung up. He keeps a stack of paperbacks in a milk crate, and a rule that you return what you borrow with a note about where you got to before you fell asleep. He says the notes are more valuable than the stories. I think he is right. Eli still drifts through twice a season. Only now he stays 2 nights and leaves with chores done that no one asked him to do. He put a new handle on the pantry door that fits a palm just so. He replaced the bent foot on the prep table. He says, a house that works smooth makes people less likely to make mistakes under strain. He is right. As for the airfield men, their path narrowed. We learned it not from a fight but from an absence. The drone stopped visiting altogether in year 6. The jammer tone never came back. The last time we saw their trucks, they were hauling fence posts instead of gun mounts, headed west toward counties where the roads still remember city traffic. Lavon said a new crew tried to run the airfield with a ledger and a list of dues, and then discovered that people do not pay without a story they believe. The ledger went to a stove. The dues went to seed and nails. I do not know if the saw blade men became better neighbors or simply thinner. Sometimes that is how the world fixes things. We found the real Maya 2 summers later, not at the FEMA site but in a church basement in Gassville, where folks hold a barter once a month. She was older than the voice on the loop and tired in the way leadership prints on a face. Logistics, just like the recording claimed, but for a grocery chain that kept 3 stores open 6 months after the news gave up. Her crew made the first caches that kept small towns tied together when diesel quit. Someone had taken her name off a shipment log and stapled it to a trap. We told her we pulled her ghost off the wall and put it in a drawer. She laughed without bitterness and traded us flour for an inverter she needed. That is the kind of ending I can live with. The dead did not become smarter. They became fewer where fences held and thicker where roads funneled them. We kept clearing the pasture edges and the culverts and the school parking lot, where they liked to gather at noon, as if waiting for a bell. We still carry the Barrett when a long straight shot will save a fence post from becoming a gallows. We still keep the Benelli M4 oiled and honest for the times when a hallway must be convinced. The minigun sits covered more days than not. It does not need to sing often to stay in tune. In year 7, a young pair came to our gate after dark, with their hands raised, and a baby held close in a towel that once belonged in a motel. We let them in after the checks, after the questions, after the quiet conversation that answers what people mean when they say help. We kept them 3 weeks and then walked them to the settlement near the old feed store where a midwife teaches classes and a radio runs on a bicycle generator. The baby will never know the sound of the world before, only the steadier rhythm of water and wind. That may be a better curriculum than the one we had. Our lists grew thicker. So did our patience. We learned to use the radio less and our boots more. We learned that the best trade is the one that leaves both people disappointed the same amount. We learned that telling someone no is not unkind if you give them a better map than the one that brought them to your door. Sometimes I go up at dusk and sit by the false rock that hides the grey water pipe and listen. The birds change shift. The cedar air drops into the ravines. A far truck on the county road carries laughter that rises and falls as if it can't decide to stay in the cab. I think about the hinge device man, about the clipboard man, about the woman with the song. I think about the people who came before them and the ones who will come after them, because roots always invite feet. Then I come back inside, check the crossbar, make a note in the book, and turn off the light in the pantry. If you were to pass through here in some later year and ask what we are, I would hand you a short list and a cup of cold water. It would say we are a house that keeps its promises. It would say we are not a council, not a garrison, not a market. We are a place that holds and a line that moves and neighbors who choose work over speeches. It would say we help when we can, and when we cannot, we will not pretend. I keep the plastic badge in the drawer. I keep the loop speaker in the same place, silent now. When the power blinks during a storm and the lights settle back to steady, I hear the spring under the floor and the little fan tapping its loose blade and the soft clack of coal shelving a tool in the right slot. That is the sound of tomorrow arriving on time. If the airfield men, or the next version of them, ever try the road again with numbers or with smiles, the door will be the same weight it was the first night we cranked it shut. The cameras will be sharper, the jars will be new, The drums will carry labels you can read from across a room. The minigun will remember every sentence it has ever written. We will remember too. We will not be lazy about the living. We will not let a clean room flatter us into stepping into a hallway that plans to close. We will survive and do what we must. That is the law of the new world, and we will follow it.